the state of Texas held a debate between Ted Cruz and Paul Sadler. Both are attempting to replace Kay Bailey Hutchinson as senator for the state.
Okay, and we are going to start our discussion on immigration with a question from Peggy Fecack, and it goes to Paul Sadler.
We're looking for some specifics on how you each would address the 1.6 million or more people without documents who are in Texas now. Mr. Sadler, you want to give them a route to legal status. How exactly would that work?
Well, I think it's important for us as a state to deal with this issue. You know, if we don't start dealing with it, 10 years from now we're going to still arguing about it. And we have a very rich, diverse culture. And so what I've said is that we need to obviously secure a border. We ought to pass the DREAM Act. We ought to do a temporary work permit so that we know who's here and they can actually participate as the gentleman described on the screen. And then there should be a reasonable pathway to citizenship. And that can be not at the front of the line, but at the back of the line. And you can put really whatever restrictions we want as long as they're reasonable. Speak English, not have committed a crime, been here for a sufficient amount of time. These things will help us move past this because our strength in our state is our diversity. No one's giving amnesty. They would still have to earn their right to become an American citizen. But we need to get past this because our state's too important to be divided as it is.
Mr. Cruz, you want to strengthen border security, and you want employers to verify immigration status. You want to ensure that. How would that affect the people who are already here without documents? Do you think they'll just go away?
Well, I think immigration is an issue that we have to address from many directions at once. I understand firsthand that we live in a nation of immigrants. We live in a land that has been a beacon of hope and opportunity to people from all over the world. And I think immigration reform needs to address illegal immigration and legal immigration. With respect to illegal immigration, I think as a matter of national security and as a law enforcement priority, we need to get serious about securing the borders. Both parties, to be honest, have talked about this issue for a long time, but I don't think either party is serious about actually fixing it. They're more interested in demagoguing, in scaring voters than they are in rolling up their sleeves, getting serious about securing the borders.
Yeah, can you specify how you would address the people who are here? Because securing the borders, I guess, would prevent more people from coming, but there are 1.6 million people or perhaps more already here. What would they do? What would we do with them?
Well, I think we need a staged approach. So the first stage would not be addressing them. I think the first stage is getting through all the talk and actually securing the border. And that involves fences, walls, technology, that involves boots on the ground, tripling the number of Border Patrol agents so that we can actually know who's coming in this country. I think we need to combine that with a strong E-Verify system that requires proof of being here legally to be able to get a job. I think if we do that, what it will then enable is a rational conversation about legal immigration. And we need to streamline and improve legal immigration, which I don't think we can have that conversation until we demonstrate we can secure the border.
But in the meantime, those people will still be here. Do you have any plan for dealing with them, or is that something you think would need to be worked out later?
As I said, the first step is secure the borders. Once we've demonstrated we can solve that problem, then I think we can have a rational conversation about what are the labor needs in this country, what are the demands, and who wants to come here, and improve the system where people wait years or even decades to come here legally. But I think as a practical matter, we're not going to be able to get that done until we get past all the talking and actually show we can secure the borders.
Can I follow up on that just a little bit? Do you think you're out of step with your Republican Party? Because as you know, in the state Republican platform, it has a guest worker program that the Republican Party supported at the convention this summer. You don't support that.
You know, I think my views are actually consistent with the views of most Texans. And I have spent the past 2 years traveling across the state, listening to Texans, listening to the concerns they raise. And the two pieces, it's only in the political world that this stuff gets complicated. For most Texans, for most Americans, they're concerned about a border that's not secure. They're concerned about the fact that we don't know the criminal history, we don't know the background of those coming into this country, particularly in a post-9/11 world. I don't think that makes sense. And at the same time, it is important, and my message from day one in this campaign is we should continue to be a nation that welcomes and celebrates immigrants. As you know, I am the child of an immigrant who came here with nothing.
Thanks very much.
I think we understand what you're saying, but I think just haven't heard a plan for dealing with the people who are already here. Do they just not get dealt with?
I don't think we should grant amnesty. But I think the way to move forward and have a discussion on this is to start by securing the border. You know, it's interesting.
Just a minute, because we've given you a lot of time. Mr. Sadler, would you like to add anything?
Sure. I think one of the ways that you deal with the people who are already here is through the work permit. That identifies who's here. It makes them here without having to run and hide in the shadows. They participate in our program through taxes. When their permit's up, it's time to go home or wherever they came from. Or they can apply for citizenship, but if they qualify. But to do nothing leaves us in exactly where we are. And to secure the border, can I simply comment about that for a second?
Sure.
You know, we all want to secure the border. But I walked the border around El Paso with the Border Patrol inside the fence or outside the fence, depending on which way you look. And I asked them, I said, you know, what kind of surveillance do we have here? And they said, well, we're basically using Vietnam-era surveillance. And when I went through Fort Bliss, they pointed out a portion of Fort Bliss where we actually test and train the newest surveillance equipment for the United States military, right there in El Paso, within a mile of the border. I said, can you train our Border Patrol with that surveillance? And they said, absolutely, we could. So now here we have the training and testing of the most modern surveillance in El Paso, midway in the stretch of the border from Arizona to the Gulf of Mexico. So why aren't we doing that? And the answer was, no one's ever asked us to. Well, I did. And I think it's important.
Thanks. We're going to move on to another subject, a topic that involves immigration. And Ross has that question for Mr. Cruz.
Mr. Cruz, the United States wet foot, dry foot program lets Cubans who come here illegally become legal. And it's an opportunity that's not open to people or immigrants from other countries. Should we extend that to others? Should Cubans be held differently there? Would you walk through that?
Well, the reason we have a different legal status for Cubans is because the situation in that country is different. It is an oppressive, totalitarian regime that tortures and murders its citizens. And the United States for centuries has allowed a situation of people seeking refugee status from political oppression and torture. And I'll point out, this is not something for me that's in the abstract. My father was imprisoned and tortured by Batista, and my aunt was imprisoned and tortured by Castro. I would love to be part of ending the Cuban Adjustment Act. And I think we can do that as soon as we don't have an oppressive, totalitarian regime in Cuba. If there is a regime that respects the rights of its citizens and doesn't persecute the rights of its citizens, of course we should change the rules. But until that happens, I think it makes sense to recognize the oppressive regime in Cuba.
Are there immigrants from other countries that we should extend the same right to?
Well, it's been long-standing immigration policy that for nations that are oppressive politically, for people fearing political persecution, we have granted them refugee status, and that's been true for nations all over the world.
Mr. Sadler, same question.
Well, I think it's wrapped into a comprehensive immigration reform, which is what we need. We need it for our state. We need it for our nation. We do over $1 billion of commerce between Mexico and Texas. The people coming from Mexico here are seeking a better way of life. They're seeking work. They're seeking part of freedom. They're seeking part of the American way of life. And I think that it only makes sense that we do a comprehensive immigration reform package that includes everyone. I think it's the only way we get past this moving forward. And the diversity of our state is so important, and this economic engine that we have with this border of Mexico, they're our #1 trading partner. And yet we talk about building a walls to separate our neighbors and divide communities. We talk about increased border patrols. You know, we have 26,000 border agents today. If you triple them, that would be 100,000 border patrol agents on the border. We do these things with people that are part of our community, part of our heritage, part of our history, and their families. And so I just simply think that we've had enough division on this issue. And I think those issues, the issues that you described with Cuba, go away if we have a comprehensive immigration program.
Okay, great. We're going to move on to another question involving immigration, and this one comes from Pedro Rojas to Paul Sadler.
Thank you, Shelley, and thank you, gentlemen, for being here with us tonight. As you know, President Obama's Deferred Action Program has given a lot of hopes to a lot of undocumented young people in our country right now that are waiting to either get a legal status. If elected, Mr. Sadler, what would you do? Would you keep this program? Would you eliminate it? What would you do?
Well, it's an executive order, and so I couldn't do anything about that. But I have said from the beginning that I support the DREAM Act. If you talk to these young people who are here through no fault of their own, they were brought here with their families, they've been raised here in our schools, they are as much American as my children, except they don't have a document. They want simply the American way of life. We are America, and if we can't see our way past giving them the chance at the American way of life, there's something wrong with us. They deserve the opportunity. They've been in our system. Many of them have fought in our military. Many of them have gone to Iraq and Afghanistan and been promised citizenship, and it hasn't been delivered to them. This is a travesty for us, I think, as a state and as a nation, and so I would support the DREAM Act. My concern about the executive order is that it can be taken away. And so now you have all these young people who have trusted us, trusted an order of the President of the United States, identified themselves, given their identity and their location, and if a new president comes in and takes the order away, have we jeopardized them? There's a fairness issue there that I don't think is right. Again, these are innocent children, innocent young people.
I want to hear Mr. Cruz' side on this. What would you do if elected? Would you endorse some sort of a DREAM Act in Congress? Or I know Senator Rubio has proposed some sort of a version of a Republican version of the DREAM Act. What would be your view on that?
Well, my view, I don't agree with what President Obama has done on this. Because just a few months ago, about 6 months ago, President Obama was asked if he had the authority to do this, and his response 6 months ago was he had no constitutional authority to grant amnesty without changing federal immigration laws. Then as we got closer to an election, suddenly the authority materialized. You know, one of the reasons people come to the United States from all over the world is because we're a nation that respects rule of law. And I don't think we should have a president who is setting aside the laws that are passed by Congress and passed into law. And I think this was an action that was contrary to law, and it was done for a political purpose. I think immigration reform, if it's going to proceed, should proceed through Congress, should proceed through public debate, should proceed through the legislative process, and not through an abuse of executive authority.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much to everyone. And we want to move on now and find out how the candidates are going to deal with another important issue to voters who have strong opinions about this issue. It's the issue of the economy.
There needs to be some changes legally for big corporations to have some kind of incentive to stay in this country, to provide good employment for people.
If you can export jobs to a country where the labor rates are cheaper, you'll never maintain a good, healthy job market in this country.
For someone young like me, most important thing is jobs, and I think the way that you get jobs going is you help small business.
Medicare and Social Security, those are not entitlements. I worked my butt off for years. It's my money, I deserve it, and that money should be there.
In reducing the federal debt, I want to know some specifics on how they're going to do it. Are they going to take it away from Medicare, or are we going to increase the tax burden on a certain segment of our population?
Okay, and we want to start this discussion on the economy by talking about the federal debt and what you both said is a top priority for you, and that is reducing federal spending. As you both know, I think entitlements make up about 40% of the federal budget. So you would, I think, almost have to certainly reduce some of those entitlements, the cost of those entitlements, and that would include Medicare, which, as you know, many Texans consider a right of theirs, and they're counting on it. So, Mr. Cruz, I want to start with you. You want to cut costs by giving Medicare recipients a fixed amount of money, what some people call a voucher, to buy their Medicare. The Congressional Budget Office has said that over time, this will force seniors to pick up more of the cost themselves, that those vouchers will become less valuable. And so I want to ask you why, given that information, you think this is a good way to provide Medicare to our seniors.
Well, let me start with first principles, which is that Social Security and Medicare are foundational promises that we have made to our seniors. Our seniors have paid into those programs. They have come to rely on it and expect it. And we need to honor those promises. And I think there's a real difference in national politics between how the two parties are approaching this.
Well, let's talk about you.
Well,
why is this a good idea?
Well, I am saying exactly that, which is right now, Social Security and Medicare are on a careening towards insolvency and bankruptcy. and Democratic Majority Leader Harry Reid, and the Democrats are doing nothing to save those programs. I think what they're doing is reckless because they're not stepping forward and saying, let's reform these programs so number one, we preserve every penny of benefits going to current seniors. And number two, we reform the programs so they remain viable for the next generations that are retiring. That's what I think we should do. Paul Ryan has proposed...
Talk about the vouchers, if you could.
Well, I know that's what you want to talk about, but actually the proposal from Governor Romney and Paul Ryan is not just a voucher. What it does is it preserves every penny of benefits for existing seniors. And then for younger people, I'm 41, for people of my generation, it provides two options. One, they can stay with traditional Medicare, get exactly the same benefit they're getting now, or two, they can have the choice of having premium support that will enable them to purchase a policy in the private marketplace, and that will bring competitive forces to reducing the costs.
Now, critics believe that the private insurers will only accept those people, those seniors who are fairly healthy, that the sickest seniors then will end up being on the government plan, and that in the end the government plan will become way too expensive because the sickest Medicare patients will be paid for through the government plan. They don't believe that will work. They believe that financially this doesn't pan out.
Well, the proposals typically have a prohibition on milk skimming, on skimming off the healthiest seniors. And I'll point out beyond this idea of premium support has a long bipartisan history. A number of prominent Democrats have supported it previously. It's only been in the past couple of years, coincidentally right about the time a presidential race happened and Mitt Romney and Paul Ryan were the nominees, that the Democrats have unified in demagoguing the issue. But the problem is they don't have an alternative. When you ask President Obama, when you ask Harry Reid, how do you save Medicare? They don't have an answer. And in fact, what President Obama did is took $718 billion out of Medicare to fund Obamacare, which is going backwards if we're going to save that program.
Thanks. Let's ask Mr. Sadler about this. What changes would you make in Medicare to cut costs? Because clearly we need to save some money.
Well, thank you for asking. But we don't have to change the programs. We don't have to. We have to make some hard decisions to keep them, and we can keep them for all of us. This is the promise we made to each other. It was a promise that we made that we would be able to retire and our seniors would live with dignity and have hospitalization coverage. Social Security is a pretty easy fix. It really is. There are three options. One, you can raise the cap currently that we use to apply taxes to. If you have $106,000 worth of income, you pay Social Security taxes fully on that amount. If you make above that level, then you don't. You pay a reduced rate because your income is greater. When Social Security was formed...
Could you talk about Medicare too, please?
I will. I'll be happy to. But if I can just quickly, when Social Security was formed, 90% of the income was within that system. It's dropped down to 83%. If we just raise it back to the original framework, we add a decade and a half to Social Security. And there are other really simple things we can do to save Social Security for all of us. Medicare is more difficult because of rising health care costs. We don't have a good answer for how to deal with rising health care costs. We have the most competitive market in the world, and we have health care costs going through the roof. One of the things that the Affordable Care Act does, in combination with what we've seen in Medicare and how it modifies Medicare, is it tries for the very first time to tether those two things together, where it puts a cap on the growth of health care costs. And that sustains and extends the life of Medicare. And the Affordable Care Act does that. It does extend the life of Medicare and extends the program.
Do you see any cuts that you would propose, any services that you would reduce, or you would allow it to continue as is?
Well, there are, built within that act, there are cuts on things like administrative costs, salaries, things for the providers, but it maintains the benefits involved. And so those are the things that matter, okay? Now, the $716 billion that are cuts to the providers, we frankly are going to have to watch. And it's one of the things that concerns me. Are we going to make those cuts too soon, too fast, and the providers lose money to where they're no longer willing to participate? We're going to have to monitor that. But every program you enact of this nature requires that type of watching in the future, making sure that it plays out right and that it works correctly. But the fact is that the Affordable Care Act does... Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You bet.
We're going to move on, but I
Sure.
think what we got out of this is you do support very different plans here for how we would approach this. We're going to move now to another question from Ross, and this one goes to Mr. Sadler first.
I want to talk about the Bush tax cuts. You've said that everything should be on the table, including letting the Bush tax cuts expire, including letting the part of the Bush tax cuts that went to the middle class expire. That's about $3,500 per family, I guess, according to some independent estimates. Is that a good idea?
Well, I'm not sure I've explained this as well as I can, so let me try again. I think our national debt is $16 trillion. The national debt belongs and is the responsibility of all of us as Americans. And I absolutely hate the debate we're having in this country today, because we're writing tax policy based on which political party you want to and what your constituency is. The national debt was created before Ronald Reagan. It is an obligation of all of us, and the tax policy that we're seeing today is a debate between one group of Americans versus another. It is a responsibility of all of us. Now, we have to do things. We have to cut spending. We have to balance our budget. Even if we do that, we may eliminate the deficit in some period of time in the future. It's not going to be immediate, not while we're still in Afghanistan. But to pay down the national debt requires more than that. You can balance the budget by cutting spending, but to pay down that national debt, you're going to have to raise revenue sometime. And what I've tried to say is that when you do that, we need to have a complete approach where we're all contributing. It is a shared responsibility, a shared sacrifice. Now, that doesn't mean that you do all of them at once.
Please summarize. We're running a little behind here because we're getting some great answers, but we really do need to be succinct.
Okay.
Thanks.
We're trying, you don't do them all at once. You may not do them immediately, but they need to be on the table. We need to discuss this. I don't like the idea that we're pitting one American against the other. I don't think that's good for us.
I may be making his point in this follow-up question, but the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, has estimated that letting the Bush tax cuts expire on those making over $250,000 would be enough money, would provide enough money in and of itself to avoid the fiscal cliff that everybody's been talking about. You've said you want all the tax cuts to remain, the Bush tax cuts. Is the country better off with those cuts in place than it would be using that money to pay off these other obligations?
I think if we raise taxes, it will kill jobs. The National Federation of Independent Businesses estimated that if Barack Obama's plan for raising taxes on small business and entrepreneurs went through, that would kill 700,000 jobs in our economy. Now, I think elections should be about choices, and at the presidential level, we have a very clear choice between Mitt Romney and Barack Obama, and I think in this race we have a very clear choice. Texans can rest assured, if I am elected U.S. Senator in November, I will not support raising taxes on any Texans. There's a sharp divide because my opponent, and I think this is courageous on his part, has said every taxpayer in Texas he will consider raising taxes on. Indeed, his position is substantially more aggressively pro-tax raising than Barack Obama's. Barack Obama says he only wants to raise taxes on those Americans earning more than $250,000 a year. My opponent has said he would raise taxes on every taxpayer. That's a sharp contrast, and it presents a choice for the Texans to make.
Can I come in on it?
Sure.
If we're serious about paying down our national debt, it's $16 trillion. We have $2.3 trillion in revenue. You're not going to pay down that national debt by simply cutting spending. You can't do it. No one of any intelligence that's looked at this has come to that conclusion. We have to, at some point in time in the future, raise additional revenue to pay down our national debt. If you truly are conservative and concerned about the future of our children... Well, can I finish my statement, please? If we're truly concerned about the future of our children and the future of this country, and we think that the national debt is the problem, then it is a shared responsibility of every American to do it.
Shelley, can I jump in here? I think this is the most important topic we're discussing, so I'll give away my time on some other question, but I think this is a very helpful discussion.
What we'll do, just so that everybody here knows, we'll allow you to answer this succinctly if you could, and we'll take one more question on the economy, and then we'll move on to the other subjects. So go ahead.
I actually agree with Mr. Sadler that we do not solve our national debt simply by cutting spending. The only way to solve our national debt is through growth. The most disturbing figure for the Obama administration is 1.5. That's been what our economy has grown in the last 3.5 years. And what we need to be is aggressively pro-growth. You know, in the last 70 years, GDP growth has averaged 3.3%. If we can get growth up to historical levels, that's how we raise revenue. That's how we turn around deficits. That's how we turn around the debt. That's how we get the 23 million people who are out of work back to work.
Let me ask you something real quickly.
Sure.
At the risk of taking this a little longer than others had thought we should, perhaps, but if you were to eliminate the tax, the income tax for the highest wage earners, the families, the households with $250,000, the CBO estimates that by doing that alone, you would avoid the fiscal cliff. You would we would not be in the position we're in now, having to wonder whether we're going to have automatic cuts in January. Why is that not a good solution?
Because it would kill jobs. Shelley, I will tell you, if you talk to Texans all over the state, the issue they raise over and over again is jobs and the economy. It would kill 700,000 jobs to raise taxes on small business owners and entrepreneurs. What we need to do, how do you get growth going? Well, look, we have historical precedents to look to. The two best ways to get growth going are regulatory reform, scaling back the abusive regulations from this administration that are hurting small businesses, and tax reform. If we do both of those,
Sadler,
that's how we create jobs.
Real quickly,
that's not the history that is current, and it's not the history that's correct. The last time we turned a deficit into a surplus, we raised taxes and we cut spending, and we had enormous job growth. You cannot grow your way out of this. No one that has understood this debt problem is saying you can simply grow the economy and get out of it. It's simply not. Not Senator Coburn, not any intelligent person that has looked at this.
Well, I agree we need to cut as well.
The numbers are too great. They are simply too great. Now, we can be honest about this and be honest with each other as Americans, or we can keep on giving the same political answers over and over again and keep digging a deeper hole.
So very quickly, would you cut would you restore the taxes, or would you maintain the tax cut for the highest income earners, or would you eliminate it?
What I think you have to do, and I'm not sure that you do that in December. I mean, you've mixed and matched fiscal cliff with national debt, just like some people mix deficit and national debt. They're different issues. They're different issues entirely. A plan to reduce the national debt can take place anytime into the future. To avoid the fiscal cliff and the deficit is about cutting spending and balancing our budget. That's the most immediate need, in my opinion. What I'm saying to people, and this is where I'm saying perhaps I haven't been good in articulating this, if you're serious about reducing the national debt, in the future, close in the future, we're going to have to put some kind of plan in place that should be a shared responsibility of all of us. And that says we're going to take this revenue and we're going to start paying down our national debt.
And real quickly, with the highest wage earners, is that?
I don't want to split. I'm not going to split wealthy and poor. Okay. I'm not going to split middle class and wealthy. This is when America was attacked on September 11th. We were all attacked. We were all attacked, and we all have this responsibility.
And Shelley, there are two ways to go after the debt. You can either cut spending and try to jack up taxes. The problem is that doesn't work. Greece has tried that. It's seeing negative 5% GDP growth. The other way you can do it is cut spending and enact pro-growth policies that encourage and allow small businesses to create jobs. You know, I'm proud to be supported by the National Federation of Independent Business, by the Texas Association of Businesses.
Because we're having a good discussion about jobs, and we want to continue talking about jobs. Pedro has the next question, and I think this one goes first to Mr. Cruz.
Mr. Cruz, yes. In July, the Republicans in the House protected an employer tax deduction for those companies that are moving their jobs overseas. If you would have been there, would you vote for that, or would you just not vote? What would have been your...
Actually, my view in terms of deductions is that we should dramatically simplify the tax code. And fundamental tax reform is one of the things I'm really optimistic that next year and in the next couple of years, we're going to have the potential for some real bipartisan cooperation to lower our marginal rates and eliminate deductions and loopholes. You know, right now, $500 billion a year is spent just on tax compliance, on lawyers, on accountants, on wasted expense complying with our tax code. That's about the same amount as our entire defense budget. If we simplify the tax code, and by the way, you look historically, some of the greatest examples of bipartisan cooperation have been tax simplification, whether under John F. Kennedy or under Ronald Reagan, where you saw both parties come together, lower marginal rates, broaden the base, and that's how you get growth going, which should be our top priority.
Mr. Sadler, will you support this type of measure?
And that was called raising taxes. It was called, and now let me finish.
No, it was not.
Yes, it is. If you lower the rate and you broaden the base and you generate the same amount of revenue, and you say you're going to close loopholes. Loopholes are exemptions and deductions by some business or some entity that wants them. You're requiring that entity or group to pay more in taxes. You are raising taxes. Mr. Romney's raising taxes, Mr. Obama's talking about raising taxes, and so are you. You all are. Listen, I've been through this process. I went through it with the state of Texas. We tried to close loopholes, exemptions and deductions, lower property tax rates, and every business group in the state said, you're raising taxes. You're raising taxes on us. Do it to somebody else, but not me. And the big shock in your life will be, if you get elected to the United States Senate, is if you try to do that. The U.S. Chamber, Grover Norquist, who you pledged your support to, will jump out immediately and say, you're raising taxes. And 6 years from now, someone will be sitting in this chair, and they'll accuse you of raising taxes 100 and something times by closing those loopholes. And you'll say, gosh, Paul Sadler told me that's true. I've lived through this before.
Cruz, do you want
if
to
you
respond
close
briefly?
those deductions, you're raising taxes. Otherwise, you can't generate the same amount of money.
We're going to move on to something else here in a minute, but go ahead and respond briefly if you'd like.
Well, it's interesting. I think Mr. Sadler and I have different definitions of raising taxes. I agree that if you eliminate loopholes and you don't lower rates, that is raising taxes. But if you eliminate loopholes and you lower rates so that the tax rates are not going up, that's not raising taxes. But you look historically, every time that's been done, revenue goes up. And I am all for increasing revenue through growth, through helping if small businesses are doing better, if more people have jobs, if they're producing more, tax revenue goes up, but not through jacking up rates, through helping small businesses and entrepreneurs create more economic growth.
Isn't it true, though, that every time you take away someone's exemption and they're paying a tax they didn't pay before, they'll say, you raised my taxes?
It depends. It's true if you don't lower the marginal rate, but if you eliminate a deduction and you lower the rate, the amount of tax paid on that income can be the same. That's not raising taxes if you're writing a check for the same amount.
It's not to you, but it would be if you lowered Shelley's taxes and got rid of my deduction. I would think that was a tax increase, wouldn't it?
Well,
tell you what.
It is a tax increase.
We could talk about this one all night. It's very important and interesting, but we do want to take advantage of the time we have left and talk about a few other things. And we're going to get back to the policy discussion in just a minute, but what we want to do right now is to give both of you an opportunity to compare your records. So based on a coin toss, Mr. Cruz, you get to speak first. Tell us why you believe you would be the better senator for Texas to send to Washington.
There are two approaches to the economy and job creation. One is continuing down the road of the Obama Democrats. More and more spending, more and more debt, higher taxes, and more regulation of the economy in our lives. We've tried that for 3.5 years and it doesn't work. The economy is struggling. The median income in this country has gone down $4,000 under President Obama. The other approach is the approach that was exemplified by Ronald Reagan. Lower taxes, restraining the growth of government spending, reducing regulation, empowering small businesses, empowering entrepreneurs. I'm proud to have the support of the National Federation of Independent Business, of the Texas Association of Business, of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, of small business owners in Texas, because my focus is going to be helping small business owners create jobs. And that's how we turn our economy around.
Okay. Mr. Sadler, why would you be the better senator?
Because I've actually done the things that he talks about. I've actually done it. I've been in the legislature. I've passed the bills. I've heard thousands of hours of committee hearings of Texans from all over this state. I was in the legislature from 1991 to 2003. I left when my youngest son was involved in an accident. During that time, I chaired a number of committees. I served on a number of committees. I served on the Legislative Budget Board. I'm a co-author of the rewrite of the entire education code. I passed teacher pay raises, the largest property tax cut in the history of our state. Not a tax raise, a tax cut, a real cut. I passed public health insurance for public school employees for the first time in the history of our state. I was named 10 best 4 consecutive sessions for that. Since then, I've been involved in the wind industry. And in that capacity, I'm also, Governor Brownback, Republican governor in Kansas, asked me to help solve the tallgrass prairie preservation in Kansas, and I did. I helped negotiate that. Governor Mary Fallin, a Republican in Oklahoma, has asked me to serve on an energy policy panel. I did. I was happy to. Governor Perry, at his request, I went to Morocco and did a memorandum of understanding between Morocco and the state of Texas. I have the experience. I have done the things he talks about doing. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. We're going to move on to some more policy discussion here. And so from the economy now, we are going to move on to health care and what kind of system we should have here in this state. We asked voters, and here's what they told us.
I feel the federal health care plan known as Obamacare is a step in the right direction. We do need a more comprehensive health care plan.
I'm a freelance artist, and so for many years I haven't had insurance, and there are a lot of other people that don't have insurance, and I think it's wonderful that people can be supported.
Obamacare is an overreach by the federal government because they go so far as actually requiring citizens to purchase a product, and I think that's just a little bit too much.
I think throw the whole system in the garbage and start over.
Okay, some opinionated voters there. We're going to start our discussion on health care first with a question from Ross to Paul Sadler.
Mr. Sadler, Texas has many doctors right now who won't take Medicaid patients that we have now. How would you propose to solve that for people who currently have Medicaid and for the millions more who are proposed to be added to the Medicaid rolls?
Well, you know, doctor shortage is always an issue, and we have to do whatever we can to make sure that we keep as many physicians willing to take Medicaid patients as possible. You know, you hear two different stories. You hear a story that comes from the doctors saying that they won't do Medicaid, but if you talk to the people that are involved with Medicaid, the parents with children that are involved or the cancer patients that are dependent upon it, they say they have plenty of doctors and that they're getting great medical care. It's always a concern, but the fact of the matter is you hear different stories depending on who you talk to. And I don't know that the surveys that we've seen on the number of physicians that are not doing Medicaid truly represent the actual number. I'm not sure that, I think they had a very low participation rate in the surveys. But that being said, we do so by making sure that Medicaid reimburses the benefits, the payments that are necessary. We reimburse the hospitals that we should. I've fought for that disproportionate share for my rural hospitals. I understand what that means. And so those payments are important.
Thank you.
Have you?
Mr. Cruz, do you think that the government has a responsibility to provide access to care for those people that we're adding to Medicaid? And if so, how do we do that? I mean, we have this capacity problem.
Well, Medicaid has been a social safety net we have had for many years, and I think we need to continue to honor that commitment. If you look right now, Medicaid is yet another one of those entitlements careening towards insolvency. And I think, again, Harry Reid and the Democrats in the Senate are doing nothing to step up and solve that problem and preserve Medicaid. I think we need leadership there. Beyond that, how do you deal with low-income Texans who earn too much income to qualify for Medicaid, and yet not enough income to be able to purchase health insurance themselves? I think the answer are free market reforms, and in particular, allow individuals to purchase health insurance across state lines. If we create a 50-state national market, what that will mean is that Texans will have available to them a lot more low-cost, catastrophic health insurance plans. And the biggest barrier to access right now is the cost of insurance is too high. If we create a 50-state national market, we can lower the cost dramatically and expand access for allowing Texans to purchase health insurance.
Thank you. We're going to continue with this line of questioning, and Peggy is going to take this a bit further.
Mr. Cruz, you had said previously that it would be cheaper for people to go to emergency rooms to get health care than to add them to Medicaid through an expansion of the program. What evidence do you have to support that?
The context of that question is I was asked, gosh, wouldn't it save money for everyone to expand Medicaid and put a large portion of additional Texans on Medicaid? And my answer was no. It is not a cost saver to do that. I think the answer for those individuals is what Ross and I were just talking about. Having free market reforms to create a 50-state national market so that people can afford health insurance. That's a far better way than putting them on government-provided single-payer health insurance.
How do you assure that they would be able to afford this type of insurance that would be available in a 50-state market?
What you do is you reduce the barriers, you reduce the mandates that are driving up the cost of health insurance. And with the availability of low-cost health insurance, the basic principles of supply and demand operate in that market as with any other, that if the costs drop, a lot more people can afford it.
What do you think about that?
And it's not working. It's not working. He just said that market, as in any other market, healthcare costs will go down, but we citizens know that's not true. They're going up. You can create the bigger market. I don't care if you do 50 states or whatever. But the fact is that you're going to have people in this country who cannot afford the health care, and you're going to have children that are in need of the coverage. I've seen them. I've been with them. And it's devastating. It's devastating for families. I met a couple in Georgetown. He is a drug rep to doctors, makes 6 figures. His wife is a Scott and White doctor. They had a child with Charge syndrome. They cannot keep up. That child is having to qualify for Medicaid simply to pay its hospital bills and stay alive. Medicaid is there in a safety net because the costs are so great that families need it. Simply doing a free market solution, as he describes by itself, is not working now. I'm not saying you move to a single source payment, but we've got to fund Medicaid. We have to do that. And if you want to talk about raising taxes, I'm not afraid of that. I'm not afraid of it at all. There are things in this country that are too important to do away with. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid are too important for us to let loose because someone pledges away your right to vote on taxes. I'm not afraid of that. And I'm not afraid of the people of Texas or the people of America about it.
Thanks, Ms. Sweet. Thanks. We have one more question on health care, and I'm going to ask if you could just be brief on this so we can at least speak briefly about foreign policy. This question first for Mr. Cruz. As you know, there's been a big discussion about women's contraception, sort of at the federal level. Should an employer who personally opposes insurance that covers birth control be required to offer contraception coverage to female employees, or should individual employers have the right to decide and deny that coverage? Should all women get the same thing?
Of course, the federal government should not be forcing Catholic hospitals, Catholic charities to violate their religious beliefs. Look, this is an issue that's been subject to a lot of demagoguery. It's not about access to contraceptives. Nobody is talking about denying anyone access to contraceptives, preventing anyone from choosing to use it.
But this is having it under an insurance plan.
This is crossing a fundamental threshold where, you know, it's really quite striking. You think the Democratic Party for years was proud to be the first major party to nominate the first 2 Catholics to be a candidate for President of the United States. And I would ask, what would an Al Smith or a John F. Kennedy think of a president who says to Catholic hospitals, to Catholic charities, change your religious beliefs, or I will use my power as president to shut down your hospitals and charities?
So you believe that an entity that does not believe contraception should be covered in the insurance plan should have the right to say no?
Yes, I believe the very first right protected in our Bill of Rights is our right of religious liberty. And I'll tell you, as Solicitor General of Texas, over and over again, I was proud to defend religious liberty for the state of Texas in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. And I think it is tragic that President Obama and the National Democrats are stepping on the religious liberty of Catholic charities and Catholic churches. I think that's wrong. We should be standing for everybody's religious liberty.
Mr. Sadler, same question. Should employers be able to make a decision whether to cover birth control and contraception, or should it be across the board?
I think women should have the right to contraception regardless. I do. And I think it should be included in their policies, and this issue has largely been resolved in my mind, I think. I just think this is an easy decision. I mean, women are adults. They have the right to contraception. It's a family issue. It's a personal issue. It's a health issue. And, you know, how many times have we heard Mr. Cruz tonight blame the Democrats? You want to know what's wrong with this country? We spend so much time blaming each other. We can talk civilly to each other, and we can find bipartisan solutions if we want to, but you got to send the right people to Washington to do it.
Thank you very much. Finally, now we're going to take a few minutes that remains and talk about foreign policy.
A lot of jobs, including the jobs in the local area, depend on defense spending. And lowering that defense spending would hurt the local economy. That's a return on investment that society benefits from.
There should be no cuts as far as our defense of our country is concerned, none whatsoever.
Our defense spending is in the trillions. I don't think it needs to be in the trillions.
Israel is our ally. It has always been our strongest ally in the region. I don't think necessarily that we should go and bomb anyone, but I think we should stand behind our ally.
If the United States participates in this combat, that's only going to drag every other superpower into this, and it could quickly escalate.
You never take an armed response off the table when need be, but to me it's option Z.
And Pedro Rojas now has a question for Mr. Cruz.
You may relate to this question, Mr. Cruz. As you know, we hear reports that Fidel Castro is very ill, could die at any moment now. If he dies soon, should the U.S. change its policy? In other words, should the embargo go away?
Well, it depends what happens. If Fidel Castro dies, he has been a cruel and oppressive tyrant. But of course, his brother Raul is still a dictator ruling Cuba. And I hope, if and when Fidel Castro dies, and he seems to have defied all expectations up to this point, that it will lead to change in Cuba. I don't think we should change our foreign policy to Cuba unless and until they stop being an oppressive, totalitarian state that violates the rights to speech, that imprisons and tortures its citizens. And I'm hopeful, when Fidel Castro dies, and it may take Raul Castro dying as well, that we will see freedom come back to Cuba.
What do you think, Mr. Sadler?
I absolutely agree with him. I do. Not much else to say about it.
So you would wait until you see changes?
Well, I think so. I think so. I mean, there are reasons why the embargo in place, and I actually agree with him. I think you have to see what comes after and see what our policies are going forward there.
Okay. Thank you very much. Peggy now has a question for Mr. Sadler.
Tens of thousands of people have been killed in the Mexico drug war. Would you support an increase in the presence of the National Guard at the U.S.-Mexico border in light of this drug violence?
You know, we did that. We now have 26,000 Border Patrol agents, up from 15,000 during the Bush administration. We added 1,200 National Guard troops. We have an absolute right as a sovereign nation to defend our border and defend our citizens, and we should. That's why we have to secure our border. This is a very complex issue, though, in many respects, and it takes cooperation between the United States and Mexico. As you know, I'm sure, there was an agreement back in 2008, I believe it was, between the United States and Mexico, where we helped with technical support and boats and aircraft to help with the war on drugs and the cartels in Mexico. This is something that we have to get a handle on. We continue to have to. But I want to say this, because we're stuck in these stereotypes in this state. El Paso, and if the people of Texas don't know this, look it up. El Paso is the safest city in America for a city its size. We have safe cities and communities all along our border. This is a great economic engine for our state. These are great communities.
Thank you.
But this is important. We have to stop thinking in terms of such violence in the Valley and El Paso, because it's really not the truth what's going on in that part of our state.
There are some people with concerns, however. Is it no then on an increase in National Guard at this point?
I think if it's necessary and needed, and if we can help and assist in curtailing the drug activity, absolutely we do. We should. We have an absolute sovereign right to protect our border and protect our citizens, but we should do it in cooperation with Mexico.
Mr. Cruz, what do you think about that?
Well, I've already stated I think we should triple the U.S. Border Patrol, because we've got to get serious and solve the problem of securing the border. You know, this question you raise is a very important question. Mexico is a great and mighty nation, and it is tragic what is happening in Mexico. It is tragic, the violence. You know, I was visiting with a Mexican businessman some time ago who described to me how he received from the drug lords a letter that detailed where every one of his grandkids had been for the past week, minute by minute. It is tragic what's happening in Mexico, and I think the United States should work cooperatively with Mexico to help the Mexican government solve this problem, stop the violence, and stop the drug lords that are terrorizing so many innocent citizens.
So National Guard as well?
Does that mean maybe more funding for the Mexican military?
I think we should be working cooperatively. Now, the danger with funding is, unfortunately, one of the real problems Mexico's struggling with is corruption. It is rule of law is so imperiled right now in the drug war. I don't think we should be sending money when there's a risk of corruption, but I think we should work cooperatively to help solve the problem.
Can I just simply add, we've had this agreement in place and it's worked well. I think we have great cooperation with our past president of Mexico, and I think our new president-elect has pledged that support as well.
Okay. Well, in the few minutes we have left, we want to hear from each of you, and we want you to tell the voters about one personal decision that you've made that exemplifies the kind of character that you'd be taking to the U.S. Senate. You each have a minute, so Mr. Cruz, you go first.
Well, I want to actually point to two decisions. One, there's so much partisanship right now in Washington, and it is relatively rare to see leaders who are willing to stand up to those in their own party. When I was the Solicitor General of Texas serving under Greg Abbott, the biggest fight of my tenure was a case called Medellin versus Texas, where the World Court of the United Nations tried to bind the U.S. justice system, and the President of the United States, who was a Republican, issued an order to the state of Texas to obey the World Court. And as Solicitor General, I was proud to go before the U.S. Supreme Court, oppose a Republican president of the United States, and defend U.S. sovereignty. A second decision I will point to is how we've conducted this campaign from day one. There are career politicians in both parties in Washington who think they are above the law, who make decisions to get elected and re-elected. Our campaign has been based on the grassroots. We have gone to literally hundreds of IHOPs and VFW halls and Denny's, and the strength of this campaign has been the grassroots, men and women across Texas, because elected representatives work for the people of Texas.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Cruz. Mr. Sadler, something that you've decided or done in your life that you think exemplifies the kind of character that you would take to Washington?
You know, character is formed over a lifetime, and my mother and father probably did instill some great things and qualities and tried to teach me about life. But honestly, the one event that I think probably tested our family's character more than any was the injury to our youngest son when he was involved in the auto accident. When you have a child that has been seriously injured, Sam was in a coma for 4.5 days, and your life gets put on hold, and you face the prospect of losing a child, you learn pretty quick what's important, where your priorities are. And from a personal character standpoint, that's without question the most important event that's happened in all of our lives, in our family. From a legislative standpoint, character and integrity is all you have. And being chairman of a committee, shepherding through legislation, actually doing the things that Mr. Cruz talks about, requires character every single day. You don't get chairmanships and you don't get named 10 best without having that character. And that experience has value. It has value for our state. And it has value for our nation. It always has in this state. And I hope the people of Texas will take a look at that because it's very important.
I'm told that we have about 1.5 minutes left. So
it comes off too quick.
You know, it just works out this way sometimes.
Has that ever happened?
Well, occasionally, but not often. Usually we've run out of time. So I'm just thinking in the last 1.5 minutes we have, you know, if you go to, when you go to Washington, you'll take many skills with you, but there's always a learning curve on something. There's something that's going to be, where you're going to have to rely on others to get up to speed. What is the one thing, Mr. Cruz, that you think you will have to lean on some of the colleagues there, some policy issue where you're going to need some help and you want somebody to help you find the way?
Well, as you point out, Washington is a complicated place. It is a place that unfortunately has been broken a long time. I'll tell you what I have been doing the past several months on the campaign is seeking advice from those who have been up there, seeking advice from Senator John Cornyn, seeking advice from Senator Kay Bailey Hutchinson, seeking advice from former Senator Phil Graham, all of whom have given me their insights on how to be effective, how to defend Texas, how to stand for free market values.
Is there something that you want to learn more about where maybe you think that your knowledge base is not where you want it to be?
Well, I'm really drawing on their experience in serving in the U.S. Senate. I haven't served in the U.S. Senate, neither has Mr. Sadler, and so I certainly welcome and rely on their experience about that institution, about the individual people in that institution. And my intention, if and when I'm elected in November, is to put my nose down, roll my sleeves up, and do the hard work it's going to take to fix these problems.
Mr. Sadler, how would you get up to speed? And is there a policy area where you think that you would have to lean on your colleagues, especially?
Sure. Foreign policy. I mean, there's no doubt about it. We aren't privy to the security briefings that the senators get. We don't have those things. I've been very measured in my criticisms of I've never been critical of either Mr. Obama or Mr. Romney on foreign policy because I think it's important that you know what you're talking about. I think as a United States Senator, you need to know when to keep your mouth shut. And right now, that's the time. We aren't privy to everything they know. And so that's an area where I would look forward to having the briefings and having the opportunity to learn more about.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks to you, the candidates, for joining us, and to my colleagues for being here as well for this Texas debate.